we experienced a situation like that, but our realization that God had put us there was kind of partway through it, or 2/3 of the way through that experience, looking back. You know, it became really apparent. Hey, this had to be a God thing because of the fruit that's happening from because of this. It was a small group Bible study. Not young people, but young Christians. Most of them were young Christians. And we were willing to lead that Bible study and prayed a lot about it and did our best. And the more time went on, the more successes we had and the spiritual growth that we saw and that we experienced ourselves because of this association. Boy, it was humbling to look back at what had happened and the fact that just how much of a prearrangement of God it was.
Right.
And it was something pretty dramatic. We had one guy, when he first showed up, he'd sit there like that and he wouldn't talk. And when you tried to draw him out, it started out with the relationships and friendships and things like that. His wife was sitting beside him. He said, "I got the only friend I need right here." So I don't need any more friends. He said, "I've got all I need." And after that group, after 4.5 or 5 years, the group kind of broke up and went their own way. And he's the most active now at keeping a group going. He just can't get along without a Bible study group.
Right.
And if everybody else drops out and is not interested in keeping it going, well, he'll find enough people to organize one. He just can't survive without a Bible study group. So, you know, it had to be a God thing.
Yeah. Anybody else have that feeling?
Well, years and years ago, I was privileged really to be at the grassroots of starting a church. And we already know that children are not my best people to be teaching, although teaching really is one of my things. But at that particular time, everything needed to be done. And I started up the young girls group, the Missionettes at the time, and I started with another lady, the children's church, and all of it just picked up and went very, very well. And when first opportunity came, I just backed on out of that, and it worked fine. But to begin with, nobody else was there to do it. It wasn't my thing, but I think God just gifted me to be there and do the right things and to love the kids and kind of settle them with the different change in their life going on when you change a new church, so many of them. And it's just when you'll let yourself be used, even if it's not comfortable, to start off with, and if God is in it, he'll just, he's so wonderful when he does that. He just makes it flow.
Yes.
Everybody benefits from it.
Yeah.
There's a principle that I think applies here, and that when Jesus says, "Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also." One of the things I remember is our church needed a junior high Sunday school teacher one time, and somebody asked me if I was interested in it. I said I didn't really want to, but if you can't find anybody else, that kind of thing, let me know. Well, and actually, it wasn't quite that. I said, if you don't find anybody else who really wants to do it, let me know, because I didn't dread it or hate it. I had a son that age, so they didn't find anybody who really wanted to do it. So I started doing it, and what I found was, as I invested my time, as I got to know the kids and so forth, and you know, I'm putting my treasure in these kids that my heart followed, and that I loved it, you know. And I mean, we had Sunday school together. We skipped out of the congregational meeting together. You know, we did some neat stuff, you know, and we had quite a relationship with each other. You know? In fact, that's how we started a tradition one Sunday, the day of the congregational meeting. I said, guys, this is really, really important stuff. And I don't want to underestimate it. It's worth it. How would you guys like to go to Hardee's and get a biscuit? So Biscuit Sunday was born. You know?
Yeah, you started that.
I have heard of that, actually. That was me and some junior high boys. You know?
Every once in a while, a Norman legacy will pop up.
That's because emotionally we were all the same age.
Right. You know, probably most of them you'll recognize without being told. When they originated.
Yeah.
I heard of that just a few weeks ago. I didn't know it was your.
Well, it just happened.
I felt actually that exact same way about youth ministry. You know, I was in that for 8 or 9 years, and I never really felt comfortable or gifted as a youth minister. But the church, I fell in love with the church I was at. And so they offered me a job, essentially, and I said, well, I really want to be a part of this church. So I started doing that part-time, then I added some small group responsibility, and I went full-time. And I love that church, but I never really felt totally gifted in youth ministry, but I fell in love with the kids. You know, and I started serving and making the most of that situation. I really did fall in love with the kids. And I think that's, you see how God works in retrospect typically. It's not very often. It's not very often that you can see it in the moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's been our experience.
And I think that's what makes Paul's words in 1 Corinthians very poignant to people, that you are gifted to serve and you're strategically placed to serve. And so you serve with your gifts, where you're at, you serve, and eventually you may get the opportunity to see what God was doing all along. But that, you know, it's not going to be in the short game, it's going to be in the long game that you'll really see what God was up to. And I think of a bunch of times in my career when I felt that way. You know, you're at a church and you move to another one, you're like, what is going on? And eventually you look back and see God was at work the entire time.
And we've realized that. And speaking of gifting, I've had the experience, and I think that has too, that in maybe 6 or 7 years apart, we took spiritual gifts classes, and my gifting changed. They were always in the same realm, but one would diminish and another would come forward.
Right.
So.
That same thing has happened to me. So I was actually told originally I shouldn't go into ministry because of my giftedness, and it changed later. So I said, well, I feel called. You know, I don't know. It was the DISC test, and that strong leaders are typically D, and I wasn't coming up D. And so the leader of the seminar said, well, if you're not a D, you really shouldn't go into ministry. I was like, I'm not a D, but I felt this very strong calling by God to go into it, but the test didn't support it, you know, so I don't know what you make of that. But
He didn't. God didn't pay attention to the D, did he?
Right. My D has come
You were
up.
still out the sheep at the time learning to be the
Right,
D.
you're right, yeah, my D has come up.
Jan and I have learned, though, because of 3 or 4 of these experiences, that clearly in hindsight, you know, it was a God thing. It was God arranged it, and we were blessed by it, and by the participation in it, and the participants that were in it with us were blessed. We've kind of got to the point where, well, he's sending us into this, you know, that's pretty obvious that it's just, we just assume that he's sending us into different ministries because that there's a need there that maybe we can fill or something like that. We're not as mystified by it as we used to be. It's just come to be a matter of course that, well, here's where he's sending us. There's a need, and we've certainly got the skills in that area, you know, that could help out and contribute. So if you have successes in that kind of God-arranged ministries a few times, it just comes to be a natural thing that you just, when you start being led that way, well, okay, here we go again, God. You know, we feel the push, we feel the tug on the back of our shirt.
It becomes a matter of faith almost.
Yeah.
That I'm trusting that God's up to something. He's orchestrating something, as Paul says. He's arranging something. So I serve.